Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Gabriel Knight 3, Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned for PC. This is the sequel to The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight mystery, or if you know it as Gabriel Knight 2, The Beast Within, then it's the same thing. And if you want to know what I have to say about that, then check out my review of it. But suffice to say, it's a very different game from both of the previous titles. First game was sprite-based, very traditional 2D point-and-click adventure game. Second one was an FMV game, and it was one of the really good ones out there. Third one is a 3D adventure game, and it was released during this era where games were converting to 3D graphics, by and large, and adventure games were having the hardest time of it. Most 3D adventure games at that particular time were just absolutely terrible. Crappy controls, crappy puzzles, crappy graphics, all over the place. They were just absolutely abysmal. So the question becomes, does Gabriel Knight 3 stand up with its predecessors as one of the all-time adventure greats, or does it just go that 3D adventure route of the era and just fall flat on its face? Well, the visual department is certainly pretty underwhelming if you were expecting something amazing, of course, but it is the early 3D era of graphics, and it didn't look particularly good. I mean, it looked good for the time. It looked good compared to other 3D adventure games of the time. But that said, it still has that problem of the models being very blocky, the animations being really robotic, textures being really low res, that sort of thing. Which, a lot of that was just limited by the hardware at the time, so you can't really fault it too much. But still, they did what they could. And they actually packed a lot of detail into the environments. I was really pleasantly surprised by that. That said, the 3D engine seems to suffer from this sometimes, because it will actually have a lot of frame rate issues, even on modern PCs. I don't really know why. It's just if you turn the camera a certain way, and that just becomes a problem. By the way, you can change the camera to different angles that are preset, or you can actually control the camera yourself. And that's what I ended up doing this entire game, was controlling the camera myself. It made things a lot easier, which allowed me to explore the environment and get a sense for how detailed this thing is, which is surprising. They really did make a lot of effort into making this game very well detailed with what they could do at the time. And then there's the sound design, which is amazing. For one, you have Robert Holmes back doing the music, and he really outdid himself with the theme song for Gabriel Knight 3. I mean, Gabriel Knight 1's theme song was really, really memorable. Everybody who's played Gabriel Knight can instantly recognize it, and, well, nostalgia all over the place for it. He brought that back in Gabriel Knight 3, and he put it in certain moments where it just fits perfectly. And it was a slight remix, so it's very reminiscent of the original Gabriel Knight theme, but instead of having that kind of electronic sound, it actually is like a piano song this time. But as for the actual theme to Gabriel Knight 3, you will hear that playing throughout this video. It is amazing. Extremely memorable, and in fact, if you ask people what they remember most about Gabriel Knight 3, a lot of them will say the theme song. Because it's just that memorable. It's really very distinct, and it just sounds awesome. So, just music is absolutely amazing in this game. Then you have the sound effects themselves, which are pretty average, so there's really not much to say about them other than they do their job, and that's kind of it. And then there's the voice acting. They brought Tim Curry back as Gabriel Knight, so instantly they got points for that. The problem with the performance, though, is that unlike in the original Gabriel Knight, where he did put a lot of effort into his southern accent, I don't know whether it was the change in audio quality or whether he just forgot how to do it after all those years, but suddenly his portrayal of that southern accent in Gabriel Knight 3 sounds kind of lifeless. It's just kind of, it draws a lot. There's a lot of very obvious fake sarcasm and all that stuff. It's pretty bad in a lot of cases. But it's frickin' Tim Curry. You can't really say too much other than that. It's frickin' Tim Curry. And the other characters have very good voice acting as well. One thing I didn't like was that the French accents are a little overdone on some of the characters. But for the most part, they do a pretty good job of that. So overall, the sound design itself, phenomenal. But what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, especially the story. This is a Gabriel Knight game. It is a point-and-click adventure, which means, of course, that it's going to be extremely heavily story-based. And at some points it does disappoint, actually. I'll get to that in a moment. But for the most part, it is a very Gabriel Knight storyline. It starts off with Gabriel investigating the kidnapping of an infant whose father is Prince James Stewart of Scotland. And so he's investigating this, and he thinks it might be related to the Night Visitors, which are basically described as vampires. So you already start off this storyline with a kidnapping and vampires. And not the wimpy kind of vampires that you see in Twilight. No. These are the badass ones. The ones that will basically slit your throat just so they can gorge on your blood. Yeah, it's the awesome kind of vampires. So, you have that part. And when you watch the opening cutscene, it's the credit sequence, and they mention Sangreal after they've knocked Gabriel out. The kidnappers basically find him on a train, they knock him out, and then they mention Sangreal as they leave. And Sangreal, if you don't speak French, means Holy Grail. So, you have all three of these elements blending together into this storyline. You have the kidnapping, you have vampires, and you have the story of the Holy Grail. And you end up in this town called Rennes-le-Château in France, and it's in an area very, very heavy on Knights Templar history. And if you know about the Knights Templar, then you know that they tend to crop up a lot when you talk about the Holy Grail, because they may have discovered it, and we don't know for sure. And I'm going to warn you, though, if you're a really devout Christian who thinks that the bloodline theory of the Holy Grail is a complete heresy, and anyone who believes in it should be burned at the stake and all that kind of crap, then don't play this game, because you're going to go berserk on it. Because that's basically what the Sangreal storyline ends up being. It investigates that bloodline theory. And, I mean, they really don't leave much to the imagination there with that particular bit, so I'm not really spoiling much. I mean, the game's title is freaking Blood of the Sacred, Blood of the Damned. So, which, I mean, that's an awesome title, by the way. But, it deals with that, and it all blends together, and it comes together at the end. But the problem is, at the very end, the story makes such a really sharp divergence into the crazy territory that you're like, wait, what? And you get whiplash from that transition. It's crazy. That said, up until then, it's a very well-crafted mystery story, because they did a really good job of making the characters interesting. There are a lot of instances where you'll find certain characters being really suspicious, and therefore you're like, I should suspect this person of being involved in one of these plots that I'm pursuing here. And so you end up being really suspicious of basically all of the characters, including your old detective pal Mosley, who comes back from the original game, although he's not voiced by Mark Hamill, unfortunately. You even be suspicious of him in all of the events here, so it's actually a really well-crafted mystery story. There are a lot of moments where you're like, that's interesting, and that's a good thing. But the problem I had with it was there was a lot of moments in this particular game where it didn't really do a good job of setting up that mystery. It basically just kind of let you loose, and you had to kind of discover it on your own. So, there's a lot of instances where you're like, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? That sort of thing. And so, that gets really confusing. And throughout the game, you're going to be playing as either Gabriel or Grace. If you've played the previous games, you know who Grace is. And they're two very different styles of gameplay, actually. Gabriel is basically doing all the gumshoe work. What I mean by that is he's the one who's going around actively searching for everything, questioning people, finding clues, that sort of thing. Whereas Grace is doing the more mental stuff. She's doing all of the research and the background puzzles that Gabriel basically feeds on. And they did a really good job of making Gabriel appear like the bumbling idiot. Because he had that appearance in the first 2 games as well. But they took that to a new level in this one because they could just manage to do it. And so it makes him off to be this really bumbling idiot, but in reality he's just incredibly sly. So you'll be going through this game, and you'll find several moments where it's like he's obviously just hamming it up, and the other characters apparently don't notice, and because they don't know him, and so it's like very nice. But throughout the game, you'll be finding different puzzles for different things. I mean, like Gabriel's puzzles tend to be more physical, whereas Grace's are basically stuff like riddles. And in fact, there's one puzzle which relates to Grace. I'm not going to go into it in specifics, but suffice to say, it is an extremely long puzzle. It takes place over several time periods in this game, which it's split into 3 days, and then each is split into several time periods, by the way. So like 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. or something like that. But Grace has this one particular puzzle where it relates to a bunch of riddles, and they're all connected, so it's all basically one huge puzzle. And while it is a really clever puzzle, the problem I had with it was that if I didn't have a walkthrough, I would have no idea how to finish it. I mean, some things were more obvious than others about it, but there were certain parts of it where I'm like, okay, I'm completely lost. And it required me to make leaps of logic that I just couldn't figure out how to make at that particular point. It was very heavy on reading, very heavy on basically all the knowledge of all the database stuff that you had to look up, and that was kind of a problem for me. But I can't really fault it on that, because that's only one part of this whole game. And it was only bits and pieces of that particular puzzle, too. It wasn't the entirety of it. It was really long, though, and it just dragged on and on for me. That said, most of the puzzles in this game actually aren't that horrendously difficult. There are a few timing-based puzzles that are a little bit annoying, but for the most part, they're fine. And it's towards the end, the puzzles get incredibly simple looking, but at times they get really clever and devious. Like there's one at the end where I don't want to get into too much specifics of it, but suffice to say, if you start out wrong on this particular puzzle, then you will fail miserably on it and have to restart the whole thing. So that got a little bit annoying, but for the most part, the puzzles in Gabriel Knight 3 are actually pretty well designed. It's just that the story isn't quite up to par with the previous 2 games, and some of the puzzles aren't quite as clever as they could be. And the direction's a little bit of a problem. And then, of course, there's the fact that it's a 3D adventure game, where you have to basically click on every single thing just to figure out what you're wanting to do with it. Interface is actually pretty clunky. You can either control the camera with the keyboard, which is what I did, and it eventually got natural. The controls were a little hard to get used to, but it eventually figured out. Or you can just select different camera angles, which is kind of annoying. And whenever you click on something, this little series of icons pops up, and these will be all of your interactions. And it's weird the way the inventory works too. You have to go into your inventory by pressing I, and then actually click on the thing you want, and then click on the hand icon for it. Then you can click on the item you want to interact it with, and then click on the item itself. It's a mess. But you get used to it eventually. It's not so horrible that you'll be just raging at it. It takes a lot of getting used to. And for a 3D adventure game, that interface actually works fairly well, and it provides a lot of variety. It's actually pretty reminiscent of the original Gabriel Knight 1 interface, with all the different things you can do. But that said, I didn't like Gabriel Knight 3 as much as I did the previous 2 titles. It did have way better music than the previous title. But at the same time, it's a really good adventure game for me, because it really did succeed in that storyline and keeping me interested in it throughout the game, and having those really clever puzzles. It's not quite as good as the first 2 games. So if you're a fan of Gabriel Knight, you'll probably enjoy Gabriel Knight 3, but take it with a grain of salt. Don't go into it expecting anything quite as good as the first two. So hopefully that helps. Thanks for watching.